She was 19 years old, presenting with what her doctor first wrote down as unusual fatigue. Based on the case notes von Economo filed that winter, here is what the family later described. She had been laughing with her sisters at dinner one evening, and then mid-sentence, she simply stopped. Not fainted, not asleep. She sat upright, spoon in hand, eyes open, and did not move again for 11 hours. Her family called it exhaustion. Her doctor, a young neurologist in Vienna named Constantin von Economo, had already seen 5 cases exactly like it that winter. He was about to give this disease a name and open a mystery that more than a century later, medicine still has not fully solved. Here is the question. This case forces us to ask what happens to the mind when the body simply refuses to wake up, and how does a doctor tell the difference between a patient who is resting and one who is disappearing? This is not a story about death. It is a story about presence, about minds that were fully awake, sealed inside bodies that had gone completely silent. Over the next 12 minutes, you will watch medicine systematically fail to name what it was looking at, and then watch it accidentally prove that the people it had given up on were never gone. In 1917, Europe was already drowning in one catastrophe. The First World War had emptied entire villages of young men. Hospitals were crowded with the wounded, the shell-shocked, the dying. Doctors were exhausted, and so they assumed were their patients. So, when a wave of strange new symptoms began appearing that winter, first in Vienna, then in France, then spreading with the movement of troops across the continent, most physicians reached for the simplest explanation available: fatigue, or the tail end of some ordinary flu. Constantin von Economo did not accept that answer. In the psychiatric neurological clinic of the University of Vienna, he was seeing patients who did not fit any diagnosis in his textbooks. Some fell into a stillness so deep they had to be woken to eat and would slide back into sleep before they finished swallowing. Others could not sleep at all, twitching, restless, terrified, awake for days at a time. A French physician named René Cruchet was at almost the same moment, describing the same bewildering pattern in his own military hospital. By April 1917, von Economo gave the disease a name: Encephalitis lethargica. The public would come to call it something simpler, something almost gentle-sounding: sleeping sickness. It did not stay in Vienna. It reached the United States, Canada, India within 2 years. And because the world was already exhausted by war and soon by an influenza pandemic that would kill tens of millions, this second disease, quieter, stranger, less visibly deadly in its first days, was easy to overlook. Families told themselves their daughter, their brother, their father was simply tired. That rest would fix it. Rest did not fix it. The first sign was rarely dramatic. A headache, a little more tired than usual. Then, within days, something in the eyes changed, a drooping lid, a gaze that didn't quite track. Doctors of the era first suspected meningitis. The symptoms overlapped just enough to justify that guess fever, stiffness, and altered state of consciousness. But meningitis patients did not lie still for weeks at a time, aware of everything around them, unable to summon the will to lift an arm. Next came multiple sclerosis, ruled out when the nerve damage refused to match any known pattern. Then a delirium of unknown origin, ruled out when patients proved they were in fact lucid. Some could answer questions with perfect clarity, trapped inside bodies that would not obey. That was the detail that unsettled physicians most. This was not a loss of mind. It was a mind fully intact, sealed inside a body that had gone on strike. Von Economo and his colleagues eventually separated the disease into its cruelest paradox. One form left patients somnolent, sleeping through meals, through conversations, through their own names being called, some for weeks, some for years. The other form did the opposite. Patients could not sleep at all, thrashing, hallucinating, exhausting themselves toward death from sheer wakefulness. Two diseases that looked like opposites, and yet were somehow the same illness. Families did what families have always done with the unbearable. They waited for their loved one to simply wake up. Newspapers of the era called it a curiosity, a strange flu-adjacent condition nothing like the influenza dominating every headline. Governments did not organize the way they had for the Spanish flu. There was no single visible surge of coffins to force the point. The dying this time mostly did their dying quietly in beds over weeks in a form the public could look away from. By the time the medical establishment took the epidemic seriously enough to fund real investigation, a commission was finally formed a decade later in 1927. Promising a cure within 2 years, the disease had already run its course through more than 1 million people worldwide. Roughly half of them died. Many of the survivors did not recover so much as change into someone else, adults left with tremors and rigid mask-like faces resembling advanced Parkinson's disease, decades before they should have. Children, more chillingly still, sometimes emerged with their personalities inverted. A gentle child turned violent, a quiet child turned manic. A transformation doctors had no framework to explain, and families had no way to grieve because the person appeared physically to have survived. The cause was never confirmed. Some blamed the same influenza tearing through the world at the same time. The evidence never quite lined up. Vienna at the epidemic's outset had barely any flu deaths at all. Others have proposed an autoimmune reaction, a different virus entirely, or a trigger science still cannot name. A full century later, researchers studying preserved brain tissue are still arguing about it. Some patients recovered within days. Others never came back at all, their stillness settling in for months, then years, then decades, until the world simply stopped expecting them to return. Decades passed. The epidemic simply stopped sometime around 1927 as mysteriously as it had begun. No cure had been found. No cause confirmed. But in some wards, the patients remained. In 1969, a young neurologist named Oliver Sacks arrived at Beth Abraham Hospital in New York. Inside, he found something that seemed to belong to another era entirely, a small group of men and women who had been frozen since the 1920s, kept alive but essentially locked inside themselves for 40 years. Awake in some sense. Present in some sense. But unable to reach outward, unable to make the world know they were still there. He gave them an experimental drug called L-DOPA, and for a brief, extraordinary window, some of them woke up. They spoke. They asked what year it was. They asked about parents who had been dead for decades. And here is the moment that stops you cold. Some of those patients had been still since the early 1920s. Which means the silence inside them had begun at almost exactly the same moment as that dinner table in Vienna, the same winter, the same stillness, the same unanswered question. Was the 19-year-old girl from 1917 in that ward? The case notes from von Economo's clinic don't say. They record her name, they describe her stillness, they note the date, and then the file simply ends. Then, one by one, the bodies adapted to the drug, and the stillness began slowly to return. It remains one of the strangest documented encounters in the history of medicine, proof that somewhere inside that decades-long silence, a person had been present the entire time. The sleeping sickness epidemic never got its own memorial, its own solemn anniversary. It happened alongside 2 louder catastrophes and slipped into their shadow. But it left behind a question medicine still has not answered. How do you measure a life that continues fully aware with no way to tell anyone it is still there? Somewhere in a hospital archive in Vienna, a folder of case notes from the winter of 1917 still bears von Economo's handwriting, 6 patients no one else could explain. The archive doesn't stop there. There are more files. More cases medicine buried under quieter names, exhaustion, hysteria, a bad season. The next file is already open. Subscribe to the diagnosis files, we open one every week.